Now today we are looking at computer systems, specifically generation of computers. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what a computer generation is. You should be able to state the 5 generations of computers. You should be able to describe the characteristics of each generation. Identify examples of computers in each generation, as well as appreciate how computers have improved over time. Now let's look at some of the vocabulary we'll encounter during this lesson. First one is computer, generation, vacuum tube, transistor, integrated circuit, microprocessor, artificial intelligence. Now, what is a computer generation? Are you able to tell what a computer generation is? So, a computer generation is a period in the history of computers during which new technology was introduced to improve computers. So, each generation brought computers that were faster, smaller, cheaper, more reliable, and easier to use. Let's now look at the generations of computers. The first generation came between the year 1940 to 1956. And the technology that was used at that time was what we call vacuum tubes. So this is how a vacuum tube looks like. Now let's look at some of the characteristics. That generation used vacuum tubes, as we have mentioned. And these tubes were very large. And they produced much heat as well. They consumed a lot of electricity. And they were very expensive. And rather slow compared to modern computers. Some of the examples of the first generation computers were ENIAC and UNIVAC 1. ENIAC is the short form of Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, and UNIVAC 1 refers to Universal Automatic Computer 1. Now let's look at the second generation. Second generation computers came in between the years 1956 to 1963. And the technology that was used at that time was what we call transistors. This is how a transistor looks like. And some of the characteristics of computers in that generation is that they use transistors. They were smaller than the first generation. And they were, of course, faster than the previous generation, more reliable. They produce less heat, and they use less electricity. Some of the examples of these were IBM 1401, and IBM 7094. Now, the next generation of computers is the third generation, which was from the year 1964 to 1971. At that time, the technology used was integrated circuits, or IC for short. And these are how some of the computers looked like in that era. Now let's look at some of the characteristics. They were smaller than the previous generation, and it has a faster processing time. It had more memory, and it was less expensive. Some of the examples of the third generation computers were IBM System 360, DEC PDP-8, Honeywell 6000 series, CDC 6600. Now, let's move on to the fourth generation, which is the generation of computers that came in from 1971 to present. The technology used is microprocessors. And this is how those computers look like. And some of the characteristics was that they were very small, very fast, affordable. Personal computers became common. Let's take some examples. Desktop computers, laptops, tablets, as well as smartphones. Now the last generation of computers looks at the computers that we have at present, looking into the future. Technology used is artificial intelligence, or AI. And some of the characteristics of this technology is that it can learn. It can do voice recognition, robotics, machine learning, natural language processing. Some examples of fifth generation computers are ChatGPT, small robots, AI assistants, self-driving cars. Now let's summarize all that we have learned so far. We've been told that the first generation uses vacuum tubes, and they were very large computers. The second generation used transistors, and they were smaller and faster than the previous generation. The third generation used integrated circuits, and they were faster and more reliable. The fourth generation uses microprocessors, and it features mostly personal computers. The fifth generation uses artificial intelligence, and its main feature is smart computers. Now let's have some discussion on what we have learned so far. So why do you think computers became smaller over time? because they had better technology. It was easier to carry. It used less electricity, and it was far lower in cost and had a faster performance. Now let's see whether you can recall some of the things we have learned so far. What is a computer generation? How many generations of computers are there? Which generation used vacuum tubes? Which generation introduced transistors? Which generation uses artificial intelligence? Which generation used microprocessors? Which generation are we currently in? And which generation produced the first personal computers? Now let's take some fill in the blank questions. Choose from the following. And we've listed some of the things you would need to be able to complete the questions below. Match the following. Now state whether each of the statements is true or false. And here are some multi-choice questions for you to try. Now for your homework, attempt these questions. See you next time. Bye-bye.